Just like with multiplying, okay, you can only divide radicals with the same index. So that first blank there, we can divide radicals if they have the same index. So that means I can only divide square root by square root or fourth root by fourth root. Okay, you cannot divide a cubed root by a fifth root. They must have the same index. Okay, there are 6 steps to solving these. Okay, some of these you can actually shorten and combine once you get used to them, but we're going to break them down step by step. So, step number 1, replace the small radical with one large one. Replace the small radicals with one large. Bless you. Step number 2 then says reduce the fraction under the radical. Okay. Once you create that large radical, you're going to end up with a fraction underneath of it. You want to reduce it.
I feel like this is going to be hard. It looked now easy.
Okay. Step number 3 then says rewrite with the small radicals again. Again, this is going to look like a lot of work because I'm breaking it down step by step. Once you get used to it, you can start combining steps or skipping steps that don't make any sense to you. Step number 4, simplify the radicals if possible. Step 5, reduce if possible. And step 6, rationalize if necessary. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is take care of all of our radicals and everything that comes with them. And then we're going to look at the coefficients out front and reduce if possible. And then we're going to rationalize. Okay. Good. All right. Let's take a look at these examples then. So our first example, we want to take 3 square roots of 20 divided by 2 square roots of 4. Okay, first things first, step number 1 says replace the small radicals with one large. So we only want to look at this section of the problem right now. So instead of having 2 small radicals, we're going to have the square root of 20 divided by 4. That's step 1. Okay. Again, we're only going to deal with those radicals first. So we took both of those small square roots and we created one large square root. Step number 2 says reduce the fraction underneath of that radical. What does 20 over 4 reduce down to? 5 over
2. 4. 1.
Okay, what did you divide 20 by to get 5?
4.
So then you have to do the same thing to the bottom. What's 4 divided by 4? 1.
That's why I said 1. Because I messed it up.
Okay, number 3 says rewrite with the small radicals again. So step 3. Now we've got the square root of 5 over the square root of 1. Okay, step 4. Does the square root of 5 reduce? Can it be simplified? No, it stays the square root of 5. Can the square root of 1 be simplified? What is the square root of 1? 1. So we don't need to write it anymore. Sorry, let me scoot that over. So at this point, once you've reduced and simplified these, add your numbers back in. So there was a 3 in the top and a 2 in the bottom. Does 3 over 2 reduce?
What? No.
No. 3 and 2, neither one are divisible by anything else. Step 6, where it says rationalize if necessary. Is there a square root left in the bottom? Is there a square root in the bottom? No. Guess what? You're done.
We did all that work.
Some people like to skip. Some people like to skip the step of putting it underneath the big square root. They just do 20 divided by 4 and simplify that way. So they skip a couple of steps in here.
So
it doesn't matter to me. Okay. It's all what flows better in your head. So if you don't like all the steps and you can simplify it down for yourself, by all means, okay, it does not matter. Okay, down here. So step 1 says to write this in a big square root. So we get 15 over 20. What does 15 over 20 reduce down to? 3/4. If you didn't remember that in your calculator, you want to do 15 divided by 20, and then you want to change the decimal back to a fraction, and it will give it to you in reduced form. Okay, so this actually reduces down to 3/4. The next step then says to break it down into its small square roots again. Square root of 3 and the square root of 4. Okay, simplify these if possible. What's the square root of 3? Does it reduce?
No.
No. So it stays. What's the square root of 4?
2.
2. Okay, your last step then is to take your coefficients and shove them back on there. There was a coefficient of 1. We don't have to write it. But here I have a 5. So this becomes 5 times 2. Okay, 5 square roots of 20 means 5 times the square root of 20. So when I reduce that bottom, it's still 5 times whatever's in that bottom. So this becomes the square root of 3 over 10. Can we reduce anything else? No. Is there a square root in the bottom? No. We're finished. This is your answer.
Awesome.
Awesome.
I'm tired of doing that.
You're tired just from doing that?
Yes.
2 problems?
Yeah. My brain hurts.
Okay, this is going to glue in on page 83, ladies and gents.
84.
We the cool.
All of us in 84.
Oh yeah, triple FUCN.
No.
Triple FUCN.
I got it next. You don't know about your head. It's a math equation. You still talking? I'm doing the math equation, big bully. You better not stab me. Who is that?
Right here. That's my fault.
Who is Ellie? Look, 84. You're so inappropriately rude. I don't my big brother.
Okay,
In the days before calculators, mathematicians discovered that it was much easier to multiply by a radical than divide by a radical than by a radical. Therefore, it becomes a customary to always rewrite division. That's what you get for being a bully. Of a radical
okay. Ladies and gentlemen, gluing in does not give you the rights to sit here and have conversation. Okay. The last thing we need to talk about is rationalizing the denominator. Okay. Y'all have done long division in the past. Imagine doing long division with everything with decimals. Okay. That's what mathematicians had to do back in the day before they gave you a lovely thing called a calculator. So, why did we come up with rationalizing the denominator? Why do we have to do this? In the days before calculators, mathematicians discovered that it's much easier to multiply by a radical than to divide by a radical. Okay? The first thing they had to do was they had to go through and they had to look up what the decimal was to the square root of 2. Okay? They didn't have a calculator to plug in square root of 2 to give them the decimal. They had to look it up in a book. They had to look up the square root of 3, the square root of 5. Okay, that wasn't just provided for them. So, therefore, it became customary to always rewrite division as a radical of multiplication. So, when we rationalize the denominator whenever there is a radical in the denominator that will not simplify. So, when we had the square root of 4, we can simplify it. The square root of 4 was 2. If we end up with the square root of 3 in the bottom, to get rid of it, we're going to do something called rationalizing the denominator. And how we do that is we multiply both the numerator and denominator by a radical that will produce a rational number in the denominator. So you can go ahead and glue this in on page 85.
Wait, what page does this go on?
I'm sorry, 84.
Yeah.
This one's going in on 84. My bad.
Oh, I glued it on 84. Ew.
No, I said 83 for that one. This one? This one goes in on 84. I told you 83 for that one. I know I said that.
Yeah.
I ain't got nothing on me.
God, I raised you so much, man.
I
thought I did.
Ew.
Because he's
Your kid is under control. I heard.
I hate this movie. Ain't another one.
Nope. You were told after I provided you with 2, you were had to provide yourself.
Bad.
These are the last pages we're gonna glue in until after spring break, so you want some time to get some. Okay,
My bad. Don't say nothing.
once you glue that in, go ahead and cut out this piece. We're gonna start there. If you wanna go ahead and create your little mini book from the last sheet, like we did all last week, you're welcome to go ahead and do that and get yourself ready and set to go.
Please stop. Hey, bro, you don't play with scissors, kid.
CJ, if you came in here to do nothing but disturb my class,
Listen, listen. It was kind of the kid just put scissors to my face, so I said, "Stop playing." That is not playing. That's him playing.
is there a reason you don't have your pages and you're not doing anything with us?
Yes.
Pick it up, pick it up, pick it up.
Here we go. Watch how you move.
Ooh. That's all we parked that out now. I bet.
I got that $100. Pick it up. Look at what comes back. Pick it up. I came so unprepared. I ain't even bring my phone today. I brought this in the socket. Whoa. You heard me? I don't even got my phone today.
You don't even have your phone today.
Right, I'm carrying nothing.
Oh no. What are you going to do all day?
Let's say jump. Pay attention to class without writing something down, which I only had 2 classes to write anything in. That's my first 2 classes. I'm good.
I got electronics and physical.
Something like that. Then I ain't been for like a month.
Yeah, you made a real booklet. We're making another booklet.
You thought I was gonna take it. I did
So much.
You said hot dog style first, right?
Hot dog.
Let me
stop. Hot dog,
then
hamburger,
hamburger, then hot dog again, then hamburger. And she looked the book.
Let me stop. That was hot dog.
That's what I just said.
Because you know what?
I said hot dog, hamburger, hot dog, hamburger. That last hamburger not there.
I had to deal with harder stuff.
I was just playing around. At least I got half of it right, most of it right. I just got a pig.
I like these scissors.
I'm not allowed to give you guys big kids.
Why?
You're not allowed.
Oh, because we'll end up hurting somebody. Nobody's vulnerable.
Oh,
Come on. Come on.
Sienna's crazy in the head. Right there.
Yeah,
You're just figuring this out?
But she won't do it in real life.
Oh yes, she will.
My bad.
She says, I said I will.
But you won't. Not to me. You love me.
Oh.
Man, no, don't try to use my truth.
Man.
Why are you playing footsies with her?
Why you worried about?
Okay,
I'm really not. You bragged about that?
Okay.
That's not that way.
hold off on your cutting and folding for
That's a
now.
little down.
That's not
Let's fill this one out. When I multiply a fraction by some number, what number does not change the value of the fraction?
0.
What can I multiply by that will not change anything? 1. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I can multiply 2 times 1, and my answer is
2.
2/3 times 1, and my answer is
2/3.
beautiful. So, if you multiply a fraction by 1, it does not change its value.
Yeah, I answered that question. Myself, yeah.
Any expression divided by itself is equal to
1.
1. Think about it. 2 divided by 2 is
1.
17 divided by 17 is
1.
1. So when you divide something by itself, its value is 1. So that's basically what we're going to do to rationalize the denominator. To get rid of a radical
Oh, that was another number.
In the denominator. If I'm in the denominator, what part of the fraction am I in?
The bottom.
The bottom. Good. So to get rid of a radical that's in the denominator, we multiply both the numerator and the denominator
The whole number.
by the radical and the denominator. And then we simplify. These are your steps. You can glue this on the top of page 85 and finish drawing it or folding up your booklet. We're going to do 6 examples, and then you have a group task card project to work on.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you got it.
That's okay.
You only get better if you practice.
Oh, I thought I broke something, but I didn't. I was just, basically doing that beat so good. Hey. Yeah.
Christian, hold your booklet.
I did. It's right here. 85, right?
85. Top of 85, because you're going to glue in your booklet at the bottom.
Oh yeah. Oh my.
Does anybody need help folding their little book?
I need somebody group stick.
Is that your day?
Bro, I gotta tell my mom the truth, bro. When I go home, I gotta tell my mom some news.
I think this one you did. I think
Guess what? This is the last page you're gluing in until after spring break. So you have the entirety of spring break to get yourself some glue.
Miss Smith, I'll stand up.
How long is spring break?
You're off Friday and then all next week.
Wait, I'm crazy. It used to be 2 weeks, bro.
Pick it up.
Basically like 2 weeks.
So you're here all day tomorrow, all day Wednesday. We got a half day Thursday.
Come on, Bobber.
We're out at 12:30. And then you have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I will see
Saturday,
you
I'm
bright
out
and
of
early
it.
Monday to night.
No, you won't.
Georgia.
Okay, Miss Smith. Okay, so
Christian is transferring
What?
school.
Oh, what Georgia? Oh, Georgia. States, bro.
Christian is transferring school.
When?
Now this.
Man, I
I'm
guess
probably
we'll
never
water.
gonna go back to school.
Can I use my last hall pass?
I'm never going to. I want to go back. This is not my group.
Okay.
Well, you can ask whoever who it is.
That last
Well,
one.
you gotta say her name.
Say
my name. Say my name.
Christian.
so hot dog.
Yes. He said, can he use your blue? No. Just give it. That's how just give it.
Shoot it. Shoot or shoot.
Bro, I don't know.
Why weren't you listening enough to be able to tell me?
I was making sure. I was gonna say, yeah, I want
You ain't in the bag.
There's no reason you gotta go under.
I went in the bag and flipped it.
I already used to do that, bro.
Does anybody need help folding theirs?
Hey, answer the phone, be like, you're.
Open it.
Open it.
Come on, bro. Don't take that. I'm not your bro. I'm your dad.
No.
Not my dad. Who's your dad?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Huh?
Oh, yeah.
I am.
Oh, that's what we do today, too. You're on.
I'm not your dad. I'm not your dad.
You just said you were. I'm like,
I'm your dad too.
and I need you to stop.
Look, I have so many kids out here in these streets. Pops
Whoa,
can't
whoa, there is you, bro.
Okay. So if you take a look at this first fraction here, 2 divided by the square root of 3. Can I simplify anything here? No. Okay, there's no fraction to simplify, and the square root of 3 is in its lowest, simplest form. But we cannot leave it like this. You cannot leave anything with a radical in the denominator. So we do something called rationalizing the denominator. So we're going to multiply this fraction by another fraction. And my fraction is going to be made up of this radical in the bottom. So the square root of 3 and the square root of 3. Okay? Because you already told me, if I have the square root of 3 divided by the square root of 3, that reduces down to what?
1.
1. And when I multiply something by 1, it doesn't change it, correct?
Correct.
So you're not changing anything. You're just manipulating.
I got a lot of iron in my blood.
So now, when I multiply this is 2 times what's in front of the square root of 3?
1.
A 1. So this is 2 times 1, which is 2. There's no radical to multiply here, so this is just 2 square roots of 3. Now, in the bottom, you have square root times square root, so we keep the square root. Multiply what's underneath. What's 3? Just to simplify then. Guys, enough. The last step is to simplify then. So 2 square roots of 3 doesn't change. But what's the square root of 9?
3.
Does 2/3 reduce it all?
No.
No. That's your answer. Okay.
Thank you.
Question.
Now it's time.
No question.
Wake them up. No, I had to.
In the top, your 2's not underneath the square root, so there's nothing to multiply with your square root.
I learned how to do this yesterday. I meant Friday. I wasn't talking to you.
Where did you learn how to do this on Friday?
Because y'all was doing this Friday.
No, we weren't.
No,
We
we weren't.
multiplied Friday.
No, it was multiplying.
Oh, well, I'm gonna have, no, we're dividing.
Okay,
Well, I'm gonna have to divide now.
the other side. Okay, what's the square root in the bottom? Square root of 10. So that's what we multiply both the top and the bottom by. The square root of 10 over the square root of 10.
That's 1.
Okay, so now when I multiply in the top, this is the square root of 2 times the square root of 10, which becomes the square root of 20. Divided by the square root of 100. 10 times 10 gives me 100. Okay, this time, your top is going to simplify. What does 20 break down into? 5 and?
Oh, no, 4.
5 and 4. 4 breaks down into? 2 and?
2.
And 2 breaks down into?
2.
And?
1.
Okay, what am I circling in?
The 2.
2's. So, I've got a pair of 2's.
2.
The 2 comes out front. What's left underneath the square root? 5. Okay. What happens in the bottom? What's the square root of 100?
10.
10.
Baking soda.
Baking soda. Okay. Your last step then is to reduce that fraction. What does 2 over 10 reduce down to?
Ooh, that's
1/5. So this is 1 square root of 5 over 5. And that's your answer.
You thought I was dumb, but there's to spell baking soda is 10 letters. So that 4, I said it right.
I'm smart as hell. I'm about to do next science.
You don't have to write that 1 in front of the square root of 5. It can just be the square root of 5 over 5.
But it looks so cool. That you
More than likely, when you have your answer choices, they're not going to have that 1 written there.
Okay.
So just understand that if you have a 1, they may not have it. Okay.
But it looks so cool. It looks like a power.
Did you notice though, when you multiply by this and you get the 100, when we simplify it, it's just the number that was underneath your square root? Okay. That's going to happen every time. Okay. You could. I'm not going to because it'll confuse everybody else, but you're welcome to. Okay, this one. What am I multiplying by to rationalize my denominator?
6.
Square root of 6. So the square root of 6 over the square root of 6.
Whoa.
Please.
Okay, so we multiply the top. Square root of 2 times the square root of 6 becomes the square root of 12. And in the bottom, the square root of 6 and the square root of 6 becomes 36.
That's how it
Okay, let's break down 12. 12 is divisible by 2. And we're left with 6. 6 is divisible by 2, 3, and 3. And 1. Okay, what am I circling in? 2's.
2.
See, this is what I did Friday.
So this becomes 2 square roots of 3 over, what's the square root of 36? 6. What does 2 6 reduce to? 1/3. Again, you don't have to write that 1, so it can just be the square root of 3 divided by 3.
2.
I feel so much happier.
Questions?
No.
Okay, we've got 3 more.
3 more.
Okay. Don't get scared because this one actually has coefficients in the front. It's not going to change anything. What is the square root in the bottom? The square root of 2. So we multiply this by the square root of 2 over the square root of 2. So watch what happens. The top becomes 4 square roots of 3 times 2, which is 6. The bottom becomes 3 times the square root of 2 times 2, which is 4. Okay. Does the square root of 6 break down?
I mean, yeah.
Okay, think about it. What does 6 break down into? 2 and 3, 3 and 1. Can I circle anything to pull it out?
No.
No. So the square root of 6 is in the smallest, simplest form it can be. So 4 square roots of 6 doesn't change. Okay, what's the square root of 4?
2.
This is 2. So the bottom is technically 3 times 2, which is 6.
Oh, 6.
So now what does 4 6 reduce down to?
2/3.
2/3. So 2 square roots of 6 over 3.
That jump low-key easy.
Yeah, I remember.
Low-key.
Actually, this was probably one of my favorite things to do with radicals was rationalize the denominator. But then again, I'm a math geek compared to the rest of you, so I expect me to enjoy it and y'all not to so much enjoy it.
I'm gonna become a math.
I'm trying to do it.
You gotta look at it. I'm gonna follow your business.
You're going to follow in my footsteps? Come teach alongside me. You got 4 years. I'll see you in 4 years. Come teach.
I'm not coming back here. No, I can't.
Okay. What am I multiplying the one on the left by to rationalize the denominator? 10, the square root of 10. So the top becomes 2 square roots of 150 over 5 square roots of 100.
Oh, that's a big number.
Oh, that is a big number.
And that's how much
It's all right, CJ. You're going to help me break this down, right?
Oh, come on now.
What
That's a big number.
is a prime number that goes into 150?
Flip the page back real quick so I can remember how to do it.
You're okay.
Flip it.
Just listen to what I'm saying, CJ. CJ, listen to what I'm saying. What is a number that divides into 150 that is prime?
Why did you just say 5?
Because he's giving you an answer.
Right. Fool.
I was gonna say a stupid answer too, so it's 5.
5 or 2. It's an even number or it ends in 0 and 5. So I would always start with either a 2 or a 5 at this point. So we said 5 and we're left with 30. What divides evenly into 30?
15.
No, 2.
15. Okay. While CJ 15 does, 15 is not prime.
2.
Okay. So we can do 2. 2 and 15. 5 and 3. 3 and 1. Okay. So what can I circle to pull out? The 2 5s. Okay, they're not beside each other, so just be careful that you don't miss that 2. So I can pull the 5 out front and it gets multiplied with my 2. So 5 times 2 gives me 10. And what's left underneath the square root? 3 and a 2, which makes it 6.
Please don't flip.
3 times 2 is 6.
Tastes like 100.
In the bottom, what does the square root of 100 reduce down to? 10. So what's 5 times 10? 50.
And that reduces down to 1/5.
Okay, and that reduces down to 1/5. So this is the square root of 6 over 5.
Now 2 more.
No, one
This
more.
is it.
Yeah, one more.
This is
It's
it.
the last one. Oh.
Because then we glue it in.
Good job, everybody. Y'all held
Do
it.
we have
Woo! Yes.
Yes. Yes, ma'am. With respect to the others, she's ignoring your code. Her shoulder was very icy. Like a ninja.
Okay. Last one then. What am I multiplying by? Square root of 12.
No.
Yes, but it's not no.
So this becomes 3 square roots. What's 16 times 12?
Got a box.
119.
100.
192.
Oh my God.
Okay. In the bottom, this becomes 5 times the square root of
144.
144.
Oh, we on the road. Good job, man.
Okay, let's break up 192. It's even, so it's divisible by 2. Which leaves me with 96. 96 is also even, so it's divisible by
2.
which leaves me with 48.
First,
That's also even. It's divisible by
2.
24,
2.
2, 12,
2.
2, 6,
2.
2, 3,
3.
1.
God.
Woo!
Oh my God. It's a big cake.
That is a huge cake.
And I'm eating.
That's your 50th anniversary tier.
Right. That's that cake where we never split it up.
Okay, what am I circling in?
All them 2.
All
I bet it's sweet.
In groups of 2. There's 1 group, 2 group, 3 group. Okay, so this is 2 to the 3rd power. Well, what's 2 to the 3rd power?
8.
8. 2 times 2 is?
4.
Times 2 is? 8. Once you get that answer, you have to multiply it by what's already there.
24.
So that's 8 times 3, which is
24.
24. Square roots of what's left? Just a 3. A lonely little 3. Divided by. Okay, what does the square root of 144 reduce to? 12. So this is 5 times 12, which is 60. Okay, your last step is to reduce 24 and over 60. Again, if you can't do it in your head, 24 divided by 60 in your calculator, change it back to a fraction. Hit math and choice 1. That will change it back to a fraction for you. Okay. You said 2/5? Yeah. Okay, so that's a 2 in the top with the square root of 3 and a 5 in the bottom. And there's your answer.
All done.
What a good story.
This is a story.
My life got flipped turned upside down.
Hi, so far, not quite.
Sitting right there. Out of It's a town called Belly.
Bruh.
Bro, you wrong.
Why?
Come on, bro. Why you gonna do that?
Bruh, I should be on.